Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the system that we're going to check in on today is my system that I've got this population of mixed red worms living in. And I don't even know what kind of worms survived, but I'm kind of treating it as like a survivor bin anymore, because I went in there 19 days ago and it seemed like the majority of the worms had just perished and there were just dead worms all over the top surface. Very few worms within the material, but luckily a few survivors, and I couldn't imagine picking all of them out one by one and, you know, as a result leaving a whole bunch of them behind. It felt to me like the easiest way to get them out was just to really provide them with an escape route into like a haven within the bin of fresh bedding, fresh food, fresh moisture, and then they would get there on their own. At the same time moistening the material they're in, because I think that the main reason for the distress was possibly the material had gotten too dry and maybe even gotten too dry too quickly. I don't know, I can't even say for sure. I've definitely gotten a lot of good feedback from the viewers on what could have happened, but it's still up in the air in terms of what the cause was. So here I'm kind of in a recovery mode now, regrettably. We would have otherwise just been trying to migrate them out of their castings so that we could have a harvest. But right now, it's just sort of a... I think that the area that was set up for them on this end of the bin is probably already populated with whatever worms were in the material. But now we're just kind of really waiting for the cocoons in the material to hatch so that they can catch up with the parents, and then we could really recover a maximum number of worms from here as possible. I really don't know how many are left in here. We were even thinking that it might be, you know, just in the dozens, if that. So I don't know. We're gonna get down into this bin today, see how they're doing, and hopefully things have stabilized. Hopefully things are on the rebound here. So let's get the camera up close and see what's going on down in here. Like I do sometimes, I've assembled a few bits of information about this system so we could talk about it really quick before we get down into it. So I've kind of relabeled these as survivors now, and I don't know, it was about a year and a half ago when I went through a similar period of trying to nurse back a surviving batch of worms. And that population is doing great today, so I really appreciate all that confidence that everyone's been trying to instill in me to say, hey, you did it once, you could do it again. So it's not really up to me, I think. I could do my best to help, but it's really up to the worms. And I hope we've set the stage for a decent recovery. But really quick, we're kind of now downstream of this alert symbol here, but the history of this bin is that they worked through 22 feedings over the course of 218 days, which was the so-called composting phase, followed by the foraging phase, which went on for a month, and then we started feeding again, but the feeding would have, well, no, we never really got into that technically. I mean, I classified what we're doing now in my spreadsheet as migration, but it's really escape. But I'm not going to create a separate category for a special type of migration that's, you know, following a horrible period of die-off. So whatever, we're migrating who survived, and whoever comes out of the cocoons. It's almost like what I've already done a few other times and sort of classified as like an in-place cocoon nursery, so that, you know, rather than harvesting the castings, then treating that as a cocoon nursery off in a separate container, just leaving it all attached to each other within the same system, and just trusting that the worms have all moved out, leaving only their cocoons behind, and then the only thing you're waiting for at that point is for all the cocoons to hatch and the babies themselves only to move out. And that's kind of what we're working on here, I believe. So we did check in here last time. We were really only going to check in, and then we kind of talked ourselves into adding all these leaves here. I think the original layout of the bedding in here was just like a paper, sort of maybe a shredded paper dominated bedding. And we thought that maybe a nice enhancement by including some leaves would be taken nicely by the worms. I like the moisture in here. It's probably what the worms really like. I know even 12 days ago when we last checked in here, so basically those last 19 days consisted of a week to begin with, after we set up the original escape location for them. A week later is when we came back, that was 12 days ago, to add these leaves and add some more moisture, and just to see how things are doing in general. So I'm not going to really try to count what's going on here, but I've already seen maybe half a dozen worms over here. And these are like even leftovers from the original feeding. We did classify the last check-in as a feeding as well, but all we really fed was some worm chow mixed in with these leaves here. And I'm still feeling other bits of stuff that might just be leftover kitchen scraps type stuff that was laid in here as the food to go with the original bedding we built this with 19 days ago. It's not a lot of worms in here, so they're not really burning through what I gave them very quickly. But I do feel like if we wanted to, we can sprinkle in a little bit more worm chow, treat this as not just a check-in, but also as a small feeding. I mean, I do see a lot of castings piling up inside all of this bedding material, so even though there's not a lot of worms to speak of, it does seem like they're leaving their mark and leaving all kinds of castings behind. Unless, of course, maybe I'm just confusing coffee that I might have used to build the feeding zone as castings. I don't know. So this was kind of nice. This little bundle here we overturned and found a number of worms hanging out inside of. So I don't know if anyone's been trying to keep tabs on how many worms we've encountered, but to me it does seem like we've got ourselves a few dozen in here, hopefully. I guess we'll just make our way through the rest of this feeding area, see if we can spot any other little congregations of worms. I'm getting a pretty good vibe. I mean, it smells like soggy paper, which is totally what it is, so it's not unexpected. What else? As far as the leftovers, we saw that little cherry tomato. I thought I felt bits of leftover food squishing between my fingers here and there, but as I continue to probe looking for more, it does almost seem like maybe I just mistook something else as being leftover food in here. Maybe they have actually broken down all of the kitchen scraps type food that we left for them, and maybe now all that's left in here is bedding, which is technically fine too. They could really live off this bedding only if you gave them no more kitchen scraps. But then at some point this would all be broken down, turned into castings as well. But I think we're good as far as the size of the space. We don't need to increase it. Moisture too, I feel like we're good. So I think the one thing we can do is we're gonna bring in some of my newly prepared worm chow that I made just the other day and sprinkle some down into here for these little guys. Ooh, I don't want to go too overboard. I guess I'll blend some of that in because I wouldn't want to have like a pile of this stuff just sitting there. But that to me seems like a pretty decent quantity to give them. I don't think it would be a big problem either if we gave them something juicy and damp like watermelon or something, but since the moisture in here does feel pretty good, I don't feel like we would benefit from bringing in a high moisture content type food. I think this is gonna be pretty good. I'm wondering if maybe just a little bit more, but into a freshly tilled up surface here. Just drop a little bit down into a little bit of a gully here. And I know it doesn't seem like much. It certainly isn't, you know. If you were to just compress it into a little hard something, it would probably, you know, be the size of like a a piece of aspirin or something. It's probably, I don't know, maybe it isn't that much. But like I said, the wormies can polish that off, and then they could turn their attention to the leaves, because the leaves are all stuff that they can be nibbling away on as well. So I think we've got ourselves an okay space for these little guys. We'll treat it as a feeding today. It'll be the third feeding now. There was the original setup, the setup that we revisited after the first 7 days, and that was 12 days ago when we gave it feeding number 2. Technically, this is now the third migration classified feeding. I still treat everything that was created over on this side as the product of the worms breaking down 22 feedings, the 22 feedings that I made reference to earlier. Because any food that's been placed in here does not result in the castings that are here. So I've got my spreadsheet actually kind of freezing the feeding count of what it took to make what ended up here, and then it actually reclassifies horizontal feedings as stuff to not really be tallied up. Now, I was just reminded that we did see lots of springtails in here last time, so much so that in the last video even we did a sort of a little close-up footage of them, just checking them out. And it did seem like we had a few of them hanging out over here in a little bundle, but not too many. The material's breaking up pretty good, nice and loose. So far I don't think I've seen any worms, but maybe from where you're standing you might have noticed something, or maybe by the time I get this video footage up into the camera, maybe I'll have another perspective of what I'm working on here and maybe spot a worm or two. Because, like I said earlier, the presumption here is that we're still holding out for some cocoons that might still be in this material to hatch, for those babies to come over and join the crowd. And after 19 days of theoretically maybe all the worms already bailing out of this stuff, so for now the two and a half weeks or whatever that equates to, there's been no adult worms in here, so there's going to be no newly deposited cocoons in here either. So if the last cocoon was deposited in here those 19 days ago, then I'm not sure about the true numbers, but I thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 to 4 weeks, maybe closer to 4 weeks, you can expect to see, under optimal conditions, the hatching of worm cocoons. So perhaps another 10 or 12 days between check-ins is what we need here, so that the next time we come in here, since today has been 19 days, another 10 days from now will have been 29 days, and that may have been enough time to let the cocoons that might still be in here and still pending to hatch, and the babies to make their way over and join in. But if we don't even see any movement in this stuff, then maybe there's nothing worth waiting for. Maybe one thing we can do is do one final till up of the material and then just let the camera run back in about 10 times speed. Sometimes you can spot little things moving when the footage gets played back quickly. Maybe there are babies starting to populate this stuff and I'm just not catching them because they're small or a little bit slow to start moving. But maybe a little bit of fast footage will reveal something here. So I'm just going to let this sit and see what we see. Alright, so before covering up, that's not water, that's cooking oil. The little pump on these cheap plastic spray bottles wear out. So if it wasn't for the cooking oil that I was placing down into that little piston pump cylinder thing, it wouldn't want to move. So in order to keep this little bottle working now for I don't know how long, quite a while now, I need to lubricate it, but now it works good. Otherwise the trigger won't return. So I'm just adding a little bit of moisture here, and I think when we replace the plastic, the best way to do that is going to be to cover up end to end, cover to cover, all the way around the edges, because the stuff was pretty dry, and you notice me taking that extra dry stuff on the outer edge and just blending it all in. So I think just as a result we've created an environment here that might be a little bit too dry for cocoon success, so I think the moisture is going to be necessary. Otherwise we shouldn't hold our breath for cocoons to let the wormies out into a dry, barren space. And then whatever moisture we're adding here is hopefully enough to spur on, stimulate that completion of the cycle and let the cocoons all hatch, and then we could really consider this as a haul out. So yeah, I'm curious to see what that footage is going to reveal, those maybe 5 or 6 minutes of me just letting the camera run, so maybe we can see if there's any movement out on the surface. With other video I've shot recently where I knew there were baby worms, I would watch some of the video back at maybe 5 or 10 times playback speed, and then you could totally see little stuff moving, which you would otherwise, totally miss with your naked eye. So I think we're more or less done here. This was really my only intention, was to throw in a little bit of extra food if they needed it, but I felt safe that, the bedding itself would serve as a good food for them if they needed it. The moisture I knew was plentiful in the migration zone, and I knew that I had deliberately left this end of it open to continue drying, but at this point I'm satisfied that we don't want to let things dry further here. I'm going to seal this thing up pretty tightly. Now the moisture that I sprayed in here a moment ago with the spray bottles also even kind of helping this plastic almost adhere to the perimeter almost all the way around. I'm just going to kind of shake it free of that connection in a few places just so there is a little bit of airflow. But otherwise I like that thorough covering. It'll keep things nice and moist, and I don't know, if we come back in here another 10-12 days, maybe at that point we can really consider this stuff as free of any worms that did survive, any babies that did hatch, and then we can harvest these castings, decide what to do with them, and then maybe relocate these little guys into a better container, because as you can see, this container has seen better days. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Oh, my little boo-boo. That's what you get from working on your car. Just had to reach into a place that was a little bit too snug and scrape myself up. Alright, well, that's it for the video everyone. Have a great day. Thanks again for watching. Bye.